Okay. I think are we ready to start, Steve? I think it's just
Sure, why
12
not?
o'clock and we're gonna, 12 noon. Instead of turning into pumpkins, we're turning into a community. So welcome, everybody. We are so excited about this series, and I'm so very pleased that we're starting with this topic that is really the heart child and brainchild of Steve to start with this, and it seems so very important, almost like the issue of othering, and really sort of really focusing on it is at the heart of what we need to understand in order to come together as communities, in order to deal with the issues of polarization and the lack of communication and lack of connection that we all experience in our communal lives. And I'm so glad that there was such an outpouring of interest in this topic. We have 35 people, maybe more, because a couple of people at the last minute said they were coming. And on the one hand, that's a lot of people to have an intimate, deep discussion. On the other hand, wow, just with this invitation, we have so many of us really wanting to deal with this issue and brave enough to come and see what it's about and look into it in yourselves. So Jim is here, so Jim, I'm going to make you the host so you can do the breakout rooms. And then I'm going to introduce Steve. Let me find those three little dots that are the secret. Okay, I think I did it. Technology is my best friend and my worst enemy. It's enabling us to do this amazing thing. So, Steve, thank you so much for starting off this this series for us. And I'm not going to introduce you except to say I've just love the way you think with your heart and you love with your mind. It's such a wonderful focusing way of being, and we're so pleased to have you. And you've crafted this over time, and it's really important to you. And so,
Yes. Yeah, it's been wonderful working together with you on this, and I'm very much looking forward to and curious about what will emerge from the the pebbles that that we throw into the water today, and what kinds of ripples kind of affect our conversation together with each other and affect you each as individuals. And oh, that's me and my noise. Here, let me turn this off. And excuse me. Here we go. And I wanted to say that this particular terminology and the project that grew out of it, that was encouraged, came from my participation, and there's a number of us who are here today in the FORCE group, the Focusing Oriented Relational Community Empowerment group. I was in it last year, and we were all, and we were all together. And there are some people who are doing it again, and there's some people who are newly in it, and some people who aren't doing it at all. So anyway, one of the things that came out of that, and a major kind of aspiration for the force group was to have a lived experience of people, people from different places, different countries, different nationalities, different genders, different gender identifications, different political stripes, and that kind of thing, sort of arriving together. And one of the things that the major thing that we had in common was focusing, and to use the idea was that we would use focusing, and the idea and practice and learnings that we had were about how focusing might be able to help us to handle the difficulties that come with polarization and come with difference and our own reactivity and the challenges of as Lynn was saying, of communicating and connecting with each other beyond difference. I would also add that part of well, I'll come to that in a bit. So anyhow, one of the things that was part of the focusing the force group was to come up with a project, and this comes from that particular encouragement, and it grew out of a couple of experiences that I had within the force group. And while listening, while we were talking at one of the somewhere in one of our meetings, there were two people who were speaking, each of them, and something really kind of resonated for me and impacted me. So one person was a person of color, and she was talking about the experience that she had while being in university and being in a class in which there was a I think it was a sociology class, I'm not sure, but in which they were exploring power, issues of power, and she was the only person of color within the class, and she was talking about her particular kind of discomfort that she had, and referenced the conversation with a professor about it all, and how the professor really hadn't gotten it as to what that might be like for her. And another person within the group is from Syria and now living in London, and she was talking about being in some groups, and she used the term, "I felt other." And when I heard that, that word took me. And what it also did is, so I felt that in some kind of way, I felt for them in that situation. And then what came for me a little later on, well, a bit then and a little later on, was some memories that I had in childhood of being 6 years old and being in grade one, and I haven't seen this person in let's say about 6.5 decades, or maybe five and a half decades. But I still remember his name. His name was Tony, and I remember, and the memory came back to me of Tony Tony in the playground calling me a dirty Jew. And so I had was an early experience of an early personal experience of being othered, and then another memory came, and the other memory that came was of being in the playground area beyond, outside of the school, and it was in the later part of the afternoon, and so this was probably 1950. Well, it would have been about 1958. Anyhow, so I was about 8 eight years old or so, and I can still see the two guys who called me, who did the "you're a dirty Jew" kind of thing. And they were bigger than me. They were a couple years older than me, and they were chasing me through the field. And I remember, the experience of it was a barbed wire fence. And I remember running away from these big guys to get away from getting beaten up, climbing up the stairs, and then, or not up the stairs, but up the fence. And then as I'm jumping over, tearing my shirt. And I'm mentioning that because I don't remember when I went home and told the story whether or not what we talked about and what was said about that particular form of othering. But my mother had been poor, and clothes and money, and that was very important. And her bigger focus at that point in time was the shirt. So that was another form of othering that she had, feeling like she was from the wrong side of the tracks. So anyhow, that's kind of what got me thinking about all of this, and a particular kind of desire that I have, which is the desire for people to be able to have the kinds of experiences, or the experiences of being able to be to be who one is, and to be part of what one is, without having to, and to be curious about other people's senses of belonging as well. So that's kind of where what got me to this. So one of the things, and maybe Lynn, you can speak about it, was that you were saying that this kind of thing is like consciousness raising, what we're doing in some way. Could you speak to that just a touch?
Well, I think when we first talked about doing this, and we were saying we would love it if focusing could help us to really be interested and curious about otherness, rather than seeing it as a threat. And then I think we said, well, that's a tall order, because it's so instinctual to feel safe with sameness, and that we take our othering and being othered so for granted. And then I remembered how illuminating it was for me as a young woman to be in consciousness raising groups that were very prolific at that time, and to talk about our personal experiences and to share them in such a way that oh, this isn't just my experience. This is a cultural phenomenon. And it's that feeling of naming something. And I think of Jean with the focusing kind of encouragement of, does that have a name? Because once you find a name for something, then you have a handle for the whole implicit everything, and the this of the othering, what we're calling othering, has so much in it, personal and cultural and generational and aspirational, and family, and just so much. And then finding this word, othering, seems like it brings something to our attention, especially when we focus on it in the Genlinian sense of the word, and find the deeper meanings and what we want it to mean. So maybe this is a point, Steve, where we could ask people what the word othering means to them. But do we want to have everybody say their name so we gather in the troops before? We won't call them.
How about we have people say their names and introduce themselves and where they're from, and then we can explore what othering might mean to people.
Right.
Do we have somebody who has a who has a desktop, who can see everyone.
This us that we are this morning, and how it feels different to be here after hearing everybody's names. For me, it feels more alive, more organismic, more like we're here. And handing it back to Steve.
So now that we've all introduced ourselves, I would like to ask you what words come to you? It may be a word, it may be a couple of words, come to you about what othering means, othering or being othered. I'd like to hear from you. I'm the only one who made a verb out of it, but I hadn't heard other people do it. And then I'd done some Googling and have found that other people have been doing that. And
okay.
that the expression being othered and othering others are using. So I don't think it was Jendlin's term.
It was your term, Steve, but then you found that it was a term whose time has come, right? And other people have used it. What Jendlin would say here is, what do you want that word to mean? Because a word is a handle. It's a name for a whole big thing. So when we say, what does it mean to you? What would you want it to mean? And maybe you could take a moment to just feel into that word and see what you would want it to hold. And I think we have time for only a few comments, right, Steve? But
yeah.
also write things in the chat about it.
Yeah. So if you have something, or when you have something, you might want to put it in the chat, and when 2 or 3 people can kind of can speak, if so moved.
It's really interesting, and I want to hear what you say here, Steve, but it's really interesting how our first people who responded were talking about the cutoff and the being done to that's in the term, that is a negative term, othering, right? And then some people were saying, oh, I refuse that term. I reject that term because I don't want that, that shame, that feeling. And I protest that term. I'm going to make it uniqueness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seemed to flow from first that kind of pushing away, discriminating against that, those kinds of terms, and then I think it was BJ who mentioned the experience of having had that happening, the experience of the experience of shame related to that. And then there were other people who kind of wanted to go to not, in a sense, not be to move beyond the shame, and to not be defined by the experience of the first definition of othering, and that kind of push away. So there's a movement that's there. So there's lots in the chat for those of you who haven't taken a look yet. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of move from people's definitions or about othering or thoughts about it, to move to an experience that I would like to use as kind of a simple reference point for our conversations and for our self-reflections. So I'm remembering about 30 years ago, or about 30 years ago, I was in Victoria, BC, and away teaching a class there. And a couple of, after a week or two, my wife and kids came and we were together. Anyway, I was with my then 6-year-old son, and we were hanging out at a playground, and they were playing, and he was playing, and a little girl, probably about the same age as my son, started, talking with him, and they're talking a bit, and she says to him, and I will remember this forever. She said, "I'm a native," and he said, "I'm a Jewish." and then they proceeded to play in the playground together. And I take that. Why do I remember that? Well, I told you some stories about me at 6 years old. What it means to me is that those two kids probably may not have had, they didn't other each other. What in the first definition of othering, and that they may have had some version of self-acceptance or self-respect connected to that particular part of their identity. And so they were able to play. And so it remains an aspiration for me that I have the kind of relationships, and that we have the kind of relationships that would be where there could be not only that, there could be that kind of playing together, but also curiosity and respect for particular identities, the particular IMAs. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to suggest that I'm going to use those 6-year-olds' first two words, and I'm going to refer to our identities as our IMAs. And I'm going to say that that all of us have a number of different IMAs, and we also may have had. Well, I'll back up on that one. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to express in some kind of way. I'm going to list my particular IMAs, and while I'm doing it, I'm going to be paying attention to my bodily felt experience while I mention each of them. And you may pick up on something as I'm doing it, and we'll see. So I'm going to introduce myself to you. I'm Steve. I'm a grandfather. I'm a therapist. I'm a Jew. I'm a friend of Israel. I'm a Beatles fan. I'm a Canadian. So when I was doing that list, I noticed a couple of things. So when I mentioned that I'm a grandfather, my heart expanded. And a therapist, I felt it from heart. And I noticed, that when I said that I was a Jew, I noticed a certain kind of something different inside, a certain kind of tightening against something in some kind of way. And when I said that I was a friend of Israel, I felt that and like I was moving behind a wall in some kind of way. Then when and then when I was a Beatles fan, it was more like that, and a Canadian was easier. So what I would say is that we all have, or we may all have, within our lists of our identities, different kind of bodily sensations connected to the stating our imas, or stating our particular identities to other people. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you folks to take some time and to write down maybe 5 or 6 identities that you have of your own imas. And while you're doing it, either while you're doing it or when you read it back to yourself, just kind of notice what happens for you in a bodily felt way. As you write it down. And you could write it on paper for yourselves. Without going into the detail about or you don't have to go into the detail about the particular identity, what I'd like you to do for sure is to just kind of pay attention to what, if any, you felt your version of some form of discomfort connected to expressing. And share, just share what kind of bodily sensation you may have had, or what kind of bodily sensation came up for you, or emotion came up for you with the one or the ones that were difficult. It's going to be kind of like a popcorn kind of thing.
Would it be okay if I start?
Go for it.
I found it very interesting because, I started with, I'm a New Yorker, I'm, a therapist, I'm a teacher, things like that. And the things that I had trouble with, it didn't feel right. The words didn't feel right. So I wrote, I'm a lesbian. And I thought, that word doesn't feel like it really says who I am. But then what would I say about having a female partner? And and I'm an old person. Well, I'm not really an old person, but I am an old person. Yeah, it was like I was arguing with, and I wondered if other people had that too. And then I thought, well, we're only supposed to have 6 and I have too many, but I needed those other ones to balance out. And then the other one that I had trouble with is I'm a visually handicapped person. Then I said, I don't see myself as a visually handicapped person. I'm a visually challenged person. Am I a visually challenged person? And it was very interesting how the words that I felt pigeonholed, I was fighting with them. And as a focuser, it was like, well, I don't have to accept that word. What would be the word that would say that thing?
Speaking to the importance of finding the right word and the right words for our own identities.
And the difference between a word that feels like it inside, that it says who you are, like being a New Yorker, or a focuser, and the words that don't feel like they're in some way unnaming you rather than naming you.
Mm.
Like, just feel like people would know me as a visually handicapped old lesbian doesn't seem like they would know me.
Thank you, Lynn. Anyone else want to speak their experience?
It's also it's also very important that it's not only the identity, the words that identify us of ourselves, but then the words of other people, the physical reactions.
Mm.
And especially if it's someone that you feel is part of your group in some way, your tribe, and then they're identifying in a different way as part of your tribe than you are. That's a very particular kind of triggering that can happen there.
And I'll just say what was wonderful in a focusing kind of way about being able to do that, I won't take up time, was that Marvin, you were able to speak as well as describe the particular discomfort and feelings that you had and such, and which can make things like dialogue more possible. Okay. So what I'm going, one more
word about that, because I think it's such an important point here, that maybe you, Steve, were anticipating someone having a clutching reaction to you saying you're a friend of Israel.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
It's
and that was where my, that was where my particular kind of something inside as I said it, and I think I felt like pulling back, and some sort of protective wall in some kind of way was there. And so that was what was connected to. So it's not only my own, conflicts or such, but more in terms of what kind of reaction I would have.
I want us to notice how our responses, inner responses, and then maybe verbalized, can be when someone is saying something neutral, it's like, yes, yes. But then if it's something that that is almost like goes against something that we identify with, there's this feeling of wanting to argue with it. How can you be, that's the first impulse. And that's, I think, at the heart of this project of othering, that it's instinctual to want to argue with it. We have so much desire for people to be like us, and to feel safe is to be with like-minded other people, right? And when other isn't, it's so not instinctual to be curious and interested in how someone is different, especially if it's different in a way that we disagree with or feel threatened by. And to go from the instinctual feeling threatened and wanting to argue or something or shut down, to being curious and interested in wanting to see what's in there, what that is, wanting to, what is a friend of Israel? What is that? Such a complicated thing. that's where focusing makes a promise that if we immerse ourselves in that practice, that we could maybe get there. I just want to say here, I don't know if this is the right time, Steve, but when we were preparing this, there was so much, and we wanted to get to the beyond othering, that part, and we knew we weren't going to get there today. And so we're going to have a part 2 in January. So people are invited to sort of see where we can get to. But this is just noticing our reactions and being friendly to our own reactions.
Well, it's a tremendously important question. I mean, so when you go, well, because there's that shock, right? In some kind of way, you think you got, these things checked off, and you got to go, who is that person? And we can take, one of the things that focusing can do when we are being able to be aware of what's going on inside of ourselves and do the focusing thing about saying hello and getting hello to what's there and getting grounded, we might be able to kind of go with, oh, okay, there's that shock there. Who is this person? And be with it in some kind of present and empathic kind of way. And then maybe from there, move into something like, well, who is this person? How did they get to, how did they get to a place of being able to, being able or willing to say, in my case, I'm a friend of Israel. And so so it's like a curiosity, because everybody in our position, in our varying positions or stances or identity, chosen identities, has had lived experience in one kind of way, and we have stories. And so it's an important thing, I think, to be able to go, oh, so yeah, who is this person? Can I be curious? Can they be curious about me?
Steve, this would be a good place for your quote from Jean about the one in there.
Yeah, hold on just a second and I'll get it.
It seems like we've sort of organically gotten to a very critical point here about that transition from some instinctual thing, some primal tribal thing that says, oh, they're not like me, they're other. They don't, they're not in my tribe, to this other thing. Who is this person? What is this one in there? Who is this one? And that's the big shift that we think focusing can help us to get to.
Well, and yes, absolutely. And I'll say the notion of the one in there, and I don't know if I have the the quote accurately from Jean, but I know that was what brought me, what brought me, and continues to bring me to with focusing is, I read in some early article of his when he was writing about people with schizophrenia. He talked about there's a person behind the eyes of everyone. And so that touched me greatly. And so that the one in there, the person behind the eyes. And I think that focusing conversations can help us to be curious about the person that we disagree with or we're shocked by, and they're the person behind the eyes of that statement that they might be making. But I also think that our focusing practices helps us to get connected with the person behind our own eyes as well. And as we work with parts and aspects of ourselves that have been hurt or traumatized or shamed, and I'm sure I'm not the only one here who has had that kind of experience of through doing focusing work and focusing practice, coming to some sort of sense of personness or one's own personhood. And I'm just going to read this quote from Jean, and that makes it possible, or where focusing has something to contribute to being able to have have conversations or dialogue, or to be curious about someone who thinks about something differently or feels about something differently that we feel very strongly about. Anyway, this is an abbreviated quote, and it's from Focusing Oriented Psychotherapy, and it's on page 21. I always go back to it. So it's an abbreviated quote, so it goes like this: one develops when the capacity to stand one's ground increases and one can consider others and their needs. One comes to feel one's separate existence solidly enough to want to be close to others as they really are. And part of the wanting to be close to others as they really are is to be able to be curious about how somebody really is. And I think our focusing practices in terms of our own self-cohesion or our own self-finding and grounding can help with that kind of thing. So that's a quote that I want to give. Yeah, and share. Lynn, our wonderful, lively conversation is moving along. What do you think about what do you think about our doing some kind of say giving about 10 or 15 minutes to people to be able to share a little bit more about what brought their particular somethings inside?
Yes, I think it's time for our breakout rooms, even though
Okay.
it's always a
Okay.
struggle to let go of the hearing from everybody, but I think it's time for our breakout rooms.
Okay. What I'd like, I'm going to give you a prompt, and some of it's already come forward in our conversation, but it goes sort of like this. You noticed what it was, in the particular kind of IMA, that there may have been some discomfort. And what we'd like you to do is to be able to be with that particular discomfort in a focusing relational kind of way, and to be able to ask something like, well, what is it that brings that, for me? And just kind of see if perhaps a memory will come, or some words, or an image, or if you're like me, a song lyric. And just kind of see, what is it that brought that?
And maybe in connection with this conversation, the feeling of, oh, you're that surprise when you hear that somebody is a something that is disturbing to you. So it's the IMA disturbance and the Yora disturbance.
Whatever wants more, whatever wants more attention from you at this point in time. It's the beginning of something, at least amongst us. And you got some beginning sense of that, or as you get a beginning sense of that, what brought that, what brings that, then Jim, if you could bring people to their breakout rooms.
We'll
And
have,
we're thinking about doing it in threes.
yeah. And then each person could share and then just have a few minutes. Maybe each person share for 3 minutes or something, and then just a couple of minutes to say how it was. And we should come back at 12:25. Is that right, Steve?
Can you say that again, Lynn? I'm
We'll
sorry.
come back at 12:25, so we have time.
Yeah, That sounds about right. Yeah. Hmm.
Oh, okay. And if you can't stay for any reason, uh, let, let us know. Don't accept your room, because then you'll be abandoning your, your group. Do we have that all together, Jim?
Hope so.
Okay.
I would like to spend a little bit of time kind of, Lynn, what do you think about, we give about, a few minutes to people to share about how their group experience or their,
Oh,
pardon
yeah.
me, breakout group experience was for them?
Yeah, I can't wait to hear about it.
Yeah, let's do that. And what, what that was like and any themes that emerged.
Talking about how focusing can be a liberatory process, how conversation can be liberating. And it sounds like it really was for you. I'm so sorry I cut you off. That's such an interesting distinction, isn't it? That often conflict between, especially cultural, historic conflict, brings conflict within. And maybe conflict within can bring conflict between. It's an interesting thing to focus on further. Well, maybe for some people are saying that it brings up conflict to talk about things that were never talked about before. I think it does for me. It brings up conflict to talk about things that that we never talked about before. It brings up a feeling of, oh, do I say this? Don't I say this? How do I say this? Am I going to be wrong if I talk to a transgendered person and don't say the right pronoun? And then what will happen? It brings up conflict and also some kind of anxiety. Shame is so powerful because it can keep us from opening up, from changing, from talking about things that didn't used to be talked about.
And I wonder, as a question as well, I wonder if those particular, the ones that you were listing that are hard to reach in some kind of way, are the degree to which they're connected to our sense of safe belonging. And yeah, I'll just keep it at that. Shame is often connected to experience of unsafe belonging that can come in the form of small, medium, and large kind of rejections and being viewed in that kind of way. So it's a bigger conversation. I just want to say that within our group, that numbers of the themes that were there within our group were that people mentioned were also there. That kind of sense of protest about not wanting to be trapped within a particular box, that I'm more than that kind of thing. And some some reservation around saying that I'm a something, or that kind of thing. And also there was a point that that one of us made, that having had the experience of being othered in one's life and in one's childhood has made made that particular person very sensitive to other people being othered. And so then there've been all kinds of kind of questions about, how to relate to somebody who's different, and am I being overly reaching out, or that kind of thing. The part for me, and I'm saying it now because we're getting close to wind down time, is I just want to make an assertion. This is what I believe very strongly. I believe that one of the pathways to being able to, connect in a respectful and curious kind of way, and an inclusive kind of way with other people, is the movement of our own kind of healing in relationship to our own having been strangers and outsiders and othered, and that the more that we've experienced our own or other people's therapists, so compassion and empathy, the more we have here to give out. So I think there's a movement that's there, in addition to some good ethical principles. So how are we doing, Lynn?
I think it's time to stop, and that's a beautiful closing statement. Was there another quote that you had that you wanted to end with? I just want to say before we end, and before you say goodbye, Steve, that I've so appreciated this group. I mean, you're a wonderful group, and thank you. And we'd love to have you join us the second Sunday in January at the same time for part 2 of this series.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and I have more and more and more curiosity to hear what comes for people around this work in progress. So thank you. I'll end with a quote. I'll make it a shorter one, and it goes like this. It's from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who was the chief rabbi of England for many years, who passed away about a year ago, who's done a lot of work on common goodness and morality, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, he said something like, the next time you see someone radically unlike you, try seeing difference, not as a threat, but as an enlarging possibility, creating gift. Tall order, but hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take good care.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Steve.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Steve.
Val. Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
Steve.
Bye, everyone.
Be well.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thank you, Steve.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Lynn and Steve and everyone.
You.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi,
Bye.
Susan.